Howdy, all you delicious people. Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat. If you don't, I don't care, because I will dare say give you this review. Howdy, all you delicious people. Reasonably, I'm going to be reviewing Trick or Treat. Trick or Treat. So, going into this movie, I would say that this movie commingles a bunch of stories together. And reasonably, it's like one really long stretch of one day. And when going into this movie, this is probably the smoothest way of transitioning things than I've probably seen in quite a while. And ultimately, a lot of people would be like, yeah, this movie doesn't easily transition things. It just goes right into this other story and this and that. But it seems with like a lot of stuff, you're back to remembering certain things of other portions of this story. Because ultimately, a lot of times, some people would forget little things, little nuances about this movie. That somebody said something, or somebody was going to do something. It could be any commingle of any number of things. But this movie ties a lot of stuff together, and I thoroughly enjoyed the aha moment coming through watching this entire film and remembering each interesting moment of it. Where can you say that you can go and see this movie currently at the second this recording? Currently, you can go onto AMC Plus. It has a free week trial. You can ultimately go into that app. How you can do that is to go into Amazon Prime and ultimately go into AMC Plus. If ultimately you don't have a Amazon Prime account, or ultimately if you don't have a AMC Plus being able to do within you and your life, maybe if you do have an app service, I would probably suggest a number of just bootleggishly like movie apps that you can dare in fact find this movie, watch it, especially if you have a smartphone or tablet or whatever. You can probably go into any movie boxes or movie pros or find any way to go and finally see this movie. Trick or treat. So, going into this movie, the one thing that I could tell you about this film is that it's really fun. Like, I've watched quite a few different kind of like mini story-ish like stories, and a lot of times they will try to transition some other stories, but mostly it'll just be like this, like really severely clunky, like, okay, we're going to tell you this story and then we're just going to stop, and then we're going to tell you this story and then we're just going to stop. Like this one, it just kind of smoothly goes along. There's no like there's no real um way of which to just go and like feel like you're not going to easily transition through this movie. It's smooth like silk. So this movie is really fun, and it's basically just pretty much just about it's a really long entire day of one Halloween. And so you get a number of different stories all mixed together. But again, it's all really in all good fun, and really when looking at it, you're going to be probably playing like Where is Waldo consistently going on to this movie. For within this movie, I would probably call each one of these mini stories within this movie, I would probably call it like a pitcher's wind up. If ultimately you guys know baseball, really within each one of these mini stories, it's like, okay, the pitcher is kind of like tweaking his hat. He's looking for the call sign, and then okay, get ready for the wind up, and then pitch. Like basically, that's what every single one of these mini stories is. It's kind of like, okay, like it has this slow to the draw, but then eventually you're gonna go, aha! Like, oh, I get why this was incorporated. Oh, I get why this was tied into this. Okay, gotcha. Um, because everything has its own like connection, and I enjoyed while watching this, eventually seeing where things will eventually connect at some point. So yeah, it was a really fun movie. At the end of the day, there's actually some pretty good stars in this movie that ultimately went off and did plenty of number of really good things. You have the girl that ultimately had played Rogue in the X-Men movie. She's in this movie. We have some actors that you've probably seen in a number of different kind of projects somewhere. The guy that played uh, God, what was his name? Connors. The guy that was ultimately supposed to be the Lizard Man in Spider-Man 1 through 3, the Tobey Maguire ones. Um, he's in this movie. I don't know any actors' names. I'm probably not even going to go through character names through this entire thing. I'm probably just going to go through, like, okay, there's a certain trait about this person, and I'm going to mention that trait through this review to make it just a lot easier. And easier for me, and probably easier for a lot of people to understand. And so, yeah, let's let's ultimately there is one thing that I have to let people know that is quite possibly a gross out moment that might ultimately have some people going, "Ew, I don't like this movie." But this movie is so good. It's just like undeniably like I enjoyed it. It was fun to watch. Um and it wasn't one of those where it's like heavily trying to jump scare people, which that's what I like. I like a movie where it's not stupidly trying to jump scare you with stupid noises or like garbagey stuff. Like I like when it's trying to make you uncomfortable, and but it's not like it's trying to build up suspense to the point where, oh my god, you find out this person is this person now, and oh, it's too late. So that is kind of what this movie is in a nutshell. If anything, there is one moment in this movie where there's a kid that is consistently projectile ralphing, vomiting, and so hopefully, and there's a reason for that in the story. It's not bizarrely randomly put into there, and so hopefully nobody uh, like hates me for recommending this movie because there's that moment in there. But if anything, the rest of this movie is so like I really enjoyed it. After seeing it, I was like, man, yeah, like ultimately, I was like thinking that I'm like, you know what? I've heard some things. I've heard some stuff about this movie, but like, I think it's just gonna be like a thing that I'm just gonna hate after after watching. And then I watch it. I'm like, man, like more people need to know this movie exists. More people need to see it in their lives, and hopefully, there's a real easy way for people to do so. Um, so, anyways, I think now is about that time to break down in spoilers because I don't want to take too much time into reviewing this whole thing because there's a lot of mini stories going on in here, but it's all for the most part smooth like butter transitions. So, because if anything, there might be at some points where there could be uh, like earlier in the day or later in the day, but that doesn't happen very often in this movie. And reasonably, it does that because it kind of knows that there are some stories that, when looking at it, to be brutally honest, there's some stories that are better than others that are put into here. And plus, there is a reason why they save certain stories for last, even though it's going on while everything else is. But there's an entire reason to come back around and help you understand what happens in this movie. So let's go into spoilers about this movie because at the end of the day, it was such a fun film. It was. I can't say that enough. It's like I was so much more happy to eventually, because I wanted to see this movie. I'm like, okay, when am I going to get to see it? How am I going to get to see it? And when I finally did, I'm like, God, this was so worth the wait. It was so good. So, anyways, let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. Trick or Treat. So, going to the very beginning of this movie, we have a robot in a knight in barely shining armor coming home from, I would say, probably doing a parade, because we'll get to that. And so, reasonably, we go into this and we have it to where uh, this girl is ultimately very much like very tired, very worn out, and she's looking at her husband, and her husband's just like, "Well, hey, how about we just go to bed, we just rest up, and we just have some bedroom business." And she's like, "Oh, come on, like." No, like if anything, like I want to get all these decorations down because family's coming over and they're gonna have a fit seeing all these Halloween decorations. And like for me also, like I just want to get them all out. I just want to get them all done. Now that Halloween's finally over, I want to get rid of all these decorations because this woman bizarrely hates Halloween, but she dresses up in a very complicated costume. I don't understand why. So it was kind of just funny to me. Like this person hates Halloween, but like her home is like heavily decorated in Halloween, and she has this overly complicated robot costume that she's wearing. I don't quite get it. But anyways, so she ultimately tells him, okay, hey, like, how about you like get warmed up and you get the tape ready, and I'll just stay out here and start taking down some of these decorations, and then I'll be up there shortly. So he goes in there and ultimately starts getting warmed up by watching some adult content, and she starts uh, taking down some of the ghostly, scarecrowish like characters, and then all of a sudden we have this little small character that we can seemingly barely see, ultimately attacking said woman and stabbing her, and then ultimately grabbing her within this ghostly sheet, dragging her off. And so ultimately, the husband is like, "Dude, I'm warm. I'm warm, woman. When are you coming down?" And so ultimately, he is like, "Okay, where is she?" And so ultimately, he walks out to the front of the yard to just kind of look around, just like, "Okay, she was taking down decorations. Where did she go?" So ultimately, he starts walking and then notices that his woman is tied to one of the scarecrows with a giant lollipop in her mouth, and she is dead. And that's how we kick off this movie. And so now I am going to try to do most of these mini stories in order of which that they appear. But if I don't, I do apologize. But because some of these stories commingle with one another, and it'll make sense once we get through these. So, if anything, we have a principal that very much is uh, delivering candy to all the good girls and boys, and so ultimately, there's evidently one kid that seems to be the school bully, and he comes to the principal's house and really just, I guess, he wants candy because even though he's not wearing a costume or anything, he's just like, give me candy. I want candy. You should be giving me candy because it's Halloween. So ultimately, the principal and this bully kid are alone, and so ultimately he goes and gives the kid candy. And what happens next is this kid starts to get really sick. And then the principal looks at him and he's like, "Oh, hey, yeah, like there's so many Halloween traditions. There's like dressing up in costume, there's going trick or treating, and yeah, there's one other Halloween tradition, double checking the candy." Ah, and so immediately we start having this kid yak up seemingly all kinds of not only candy, but then ultimately his own blood, And so we had the principal quickly looking around and then taking this kid and quickly, as much as possible, dragging him into his home. And while this kid is still yakking away, this principal is like hugging onto him and he's like, "Oh no, like it's like, dude, you're getting all over me." And so eventually another batch of kids all say trick or treat, and ultimately the principal tries to turn off the light to ultimately try to get them to go away. But they're like, "Hey, we know you're home." So ultimately, he turns the light back on, and he's like covered in blood. And they're like, "Oh, hey, cool costume!" Like, because ultimately they know them as their principal, so they're assuming that he's dressed up as a dead principal. So reasonably weirdly, one of the kids is suspiciously looking at the blood trail that is in front of the house and also looking at him. And they're trying to put two and two together, but they're like, whatever. But so the principal gives them candy and they're okay. They're going about their days. This is actually not the make them sick candy. So we ultimately have this principal that has an entire hole already dug up for this kid evidently, and so he tosses him into this hole. All the while, his neighbor from across the street is either heckling him or asking him questions or whatever, and then his son is also asking him questions about what they're going to do for the night. And so, funny thing is, like basically, like, and the kid is like yelling out to his father, and he's like, "Could you be quiet?" And he's like, "How about you go and watch like Charlie Brown?" And the kid's like, "Charlie Brown's an asshole." Like, oh my god, this is hilarious. And so ultimately we have like a neighbor that is also yelling out, mentioning, "Hey, what's that noise?" And like, "God, it smells like uh like crap out here. What's going on?" And so the principal says, "Oh yeah, like my septic tank busted," and he's like, "Well, get it fixed." And like he's such a rubble rousing neighbor that's like that is basically giving him so much crap. But then all the while, once his neighbor goes back into his own home, eventually the principal, after getting this body into the grave, ultimately walks back into his home, and the neighbor is banging on the window, "Hey, help me, help me!" And the principal is just like, "Fuck you," and he ultimately walks into his home. So kind of cussing and stuff like that. It's in a very rated R like movie. And so we ultimately find out that reasonably within this movie that him and his son were going to carve pumpkins. But really what they were actually going to do is carve a human head. And ultimately the kid mentions that that he wants to be helped with the eyes. And so basically, both the kid and the father are looking at this human head and going to think about carving it all out. So they're going to carve this kid's head like a jack o' lantern pumpkin. And so that is the one portion of scene. Ultimately, the principal tells his son that ultimately they aren't going to go out and trick or treating because he has a date later on tonight. Um, so, yeah, there is more portions of this story to be seen. So, ultimately, at one point uh, in this transitions of stories. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to mention like a part that I don't know exactly which order this comes into, but there's a reason for that. So we have some woman at this parade. She is ultimately just having the time of her life, and like we think this is all just normal. Like, okay, we're gonna have like an adult-ish like moment where this woman is getting romantic with some masked man, and ultimately this masked man is wearing some like red hoodie, a red-ish like cloak, and he's wearing this black mask. And so like we're assuming like, okay, somebody's off on this parade having a little bit too much adult fun while this parade is going on. And so reasonably these two are having fun, but then we eventually realize that the woman is ultimately uh, getting a little less than what she bargained, or a little more than what she bargained for, because we find out that this masked cloaked man is actually a vampire and is basically repetitiously biting her to the point to where she is bleeding all over. She's bleeding all over, and so she runs into the parade and ultimately grabs onto a robotish like person, which when they take off their mask, it's the same couple from the scene before, the very first scene, where ultimately they were going to undecorate their house and go in and have some adult time together in the bedroom, but ultimately the robot ended up being dead. So ultimately this girl falls over, and what happens is the vampirish guy grabs her and just places her somewhere, and then just walks away very casually, and evidently nobody notices that this girl is dead because Halloween. So going into this, we have these girls that are all very much in these dressing rooms transitioning now. They're in these dressing rooms, they're talking about how a lot of their costumes are way too revealing, that a lot of times they end up popping out of them, and ultimately a lot of the other girls say, well, that's really just the point. So basically these girls have a tradition of going into these costumes every year as the same character or something along those lines. So all these girls go out, and we find that they're all Disney-esque like princesses. One of them is Cinderella, one of them is Sleeping Beauty, uh, and so on and so forth. And the last girl is kind of she kind of doesn't really want to come out right away, but she eventually does. And she comes out as Little Red Riding Hood, and ultimately she's like, God, I'm just so embarrassed by wearing this costume. It's like, ugh. And she's like, it's tradition. We wear it every year. Like, come on. But there's an inside joke with this costume. There's a reason for this being such an embarrassing costume, because uh, we will find out here shortly. So, and it seems like there's these repetitive scenes back and forth where we keep coming back to this party scene to eventually get us to where we eventually find out what this whole party scene is about, which I will get into in one smooth motion. I will not keep coming back to it. So they ultimately all go to the register and all buy these costumes, and ultimately, besides just buying the costumes, they end up buying the guy behind the counter to come to this party. And so reasonably, these girls are all off uh, to come to this party. Like some of them are kind of showing up slowly by slowly, and we have the girl that is a Red Riding Hood that ultimately is like uh, she's waiting on something to where all the a bulk of the other girls are already at this party, and so eventually, while some of the other girls are having fun, ultimately the Cinderella girl is calling the Little Red Riding Hood to ultimately tell her, hey, like, whenever you can come to this party, I already have a guy lined up for you. I already have a boyfriend lined up for you. But ideally, Little Red Riding Hood had already had a boyfriend lined up for this party, and so reasonably, like, it's either she comes with someone or she ends up with this schmuck ash like guy. So this guy in this baby costume that looks not quite all that great, and the Little Red Riding Hood character already knows that the Cinderella character is gonna um like make her end up with like the worst looking guy there, because that's usually the plan. So we end up having it be that Little Red Riding Hood is making her way to this party. And so while making it to this party, it seems that consistently we find uh, this guy who was the vampire previously following her. And so reasonably, I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute. So is she gonna get it? Is she gonna end up being a vampire, and then she's going to infect all of her other friends? And is that how this thing is gonna get resolved? No. So what ends up happening is that eventually this girl keeps consistently being followed by this vampire character, and she's like, you know what? How about you just show yourself? She keeps getting followed by him, and so ultimately she's like, you know what? How about you just show yourself? Come on, like come out. Like I know you're following me, and so this guy comes out of the shadows and showcases his vampire teeth. And so now what happens is Little Red Riding Hood enters the party, and ultimately she looks very disheveled and looks uh, like some of her costume had come off. And the other girl's like, what the heck? Like, hey, you're supposed to come in here with a costume. And she's like, well, I'm sorry, guys. Like, you know what? I tried to come to the party and I ended up being attacked by someone who ended up trying to bite me. And so immediately they grab that vampire guy and throw him to the ground. And then we eventually realize that this vampire had fake teeth. So they take the fake teeth out, they throw it off to the side, and then they eventually just unmask this vampire guy, and it's the principal from earlier on. Ultimately, we find out that this principal had mentioned to his son that he had a date later on tonight, and this date was to go to this party and to date somebody, or just be at this party. And so ideally that was his plan. So ultimately all the girls are just like, okay, well, now we're really going to get this party started, and because everyone is now here. So what ends up happening is that everybody is starting to get really excited, And now that the party's really kicking off, but what the actual party actually is that all these girls are starting to slowly but surely start to uh, take off portions of their clothes. And I'm like, what is going on here? We end up finding out every single one of these Cinderella girls or Disney-esque looking character girls are actually all werewolves. And so they're all changing and transforming all right into this party to where ultimately Little Red Riding Hood is transforming on top of the principal and is going to kill and eat him while everybody else, all the other women are all transforming as well. Like skin is falling off them because they basically have to like de-shed. You have other girls that are helping other girls de-shed their skin because underneath is a werewolf underneath all of that. And yeah, it's really intriguing. It's really kind of like, wow, okay, all right, this is cool. Um, and it's not like a CGI werewolf. It's like full people in suits, and I like that. And that was a great surprise to otherwise go, oh wow, this is really fun. And so, not fun for the other people at that party that end up having to get killed, but still, it is what it is. So now, moving on to other stories. So we ultimately have kids that are consistently going trick or treating. The same kids that ended up at the principal's door, they are consistently more and more going trick or treating. These kids that go to everyone's house to trick or treat. These kids will actually have a story. So they ultimately collect this last girl, and ultimately they will or the ultimate get everyone together, and so they go trick or treating. But while they go trick or treating, they are all collecting like jack o' lanterns. I guess to all go to this other person's house. Evidently, they are scrambling, collecting all these jack o' lanterns to prank one of the neighbors, and we'll find that out later. Um, because this is a neighbor that also hates Halloween, but he has a right reason to. So we have it to where these trick or treaters are trying to get all jack lanterns, and so then eventually they all go to a place to tell a ghost story. And so the ghost story is that there is one guy that has to drive certain kids uh, because they're all really special in their own unique way. They're all problem children and stuff like that. So this bus driver has to like drive these special kids to this special place. And so basically all of these parents hate these special kids um, because they're all problem children. And so basically all of these kids, every single one of these kids, are all wearing Halloween costumes in this bus. So what ends up happening as is the parents of these kids, because they're all problem children, the parents make a deal with the bus driver to at some point to drive all the kids off some cliff to get rid of them. And so ideally the bus driver is going to do what the parents say, because ultimately he probably offered them a ton of money. Or the parents probably offered this guy a lot of money to do so. So he ends up driving uh, driving the wrong way. And so immediately one of the kids is consistently muttering, wrong way, wrong way. Like he's going the wrong way. This is not the normal way. And so we have to where this bus driver stops, and then immediately he is getting all of these handcuffs out bizarrely. And again, all of these kids don't know any better because they're all really just they're all really special in their own unique way. And so he starts to handcuff every single one of them to their seats because ultimately what he's going to do is drive this bus off of a cliff for them to probably all drown. And so ultimately what happens is while this bus driver is starting to handcuff all these people or handcuff all these kids, one of the kids takes control of the bus and drives the bus off of the cliff anyways. And so what happens is that the bus driver is still in the bus, and so he scrambled to get off the bus, and evidently out of all of these kids, he was the only one that had vanished and were to never have been seen again. But every single one of these kids had all died on this bus. They didn't get out of this bus alive. Every single one of their masks were all had all floated up to the river, but all you see is the bus driver, and that's it. All the other kids must have died off this bus because they didn't know any better of how to actually get off this bus, but the bus driver did, and the bus driver's task was to get rid of his kids, and he performed said task. So after these trick-or-treaters all hear this ghost story, immediately what they're trying to do is try to channel these kids to ultimately talk to them. And so what ends up happening is some of the kids kind of leave, and so because ultimately they want to do some kind of project to channel these spirits, and so there's the witch and I think the pirate kid or the one left there. What ends up happening is the spirits of the kids come back, and they're haunting the witch and the pirate. And so all of a sudden, the witch starts running, and she's like, "Oh my god!" To where the pirate kid ultimately falls over, and he gets stabbed and killed, and the witch girl has to watch him die, and so she starts running all the way to where there was this elevator part where because there's this cliff and then there's an elevator to go down to the actual water. Bizarrely, I don't know why, but justifiably this girl runs to this elevator cage. And so what ends up happening is or ends up running off, and the witch ends up running off, and so eventually these spirited kids have to finally just relent and say hey, 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 calm down, calm down. And so the spirit kids all of a sudden take off all their masks, and they were actually the trick-or-treaters pulling a prank on her. And they're like, hey, we were just pulling a prank. If anything, we thought it was funny, but now we're realizing that we might have gone too far. And so the girl's like, oh my god, why did you do this to me? And so what ends up happening shortly thereafter is because these kids had pulled a prank on her, we find out that the actual real spirited kids all come out from the water now and are going to attack the kids that had pulled a prank on the trick-or-treaters. And because the pirate kid even comes back alive and says, "Oh no, hey, yeah, this was a prank." And so basically, the real ghost kids all come out to kill all these trick or treaters, and the trick or treaters are all running to the girl in the cage, and they're just like, "Oh my god, like let us in to this elevator so we can go up and we can be okay." And the girl is just like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna press the level to go up on this elevator, and goodbye, everybody." And they're like, "No!" And so basically, they're off to just be killed, sadly enough. So, the last story that goes into this is the principal's neighbor, the principal that had very much been yelling at his neighbor that his yard smells like crap and this and that, and ultimately been very scared, but the principal didn't do anything. So, and we replay out that entire scene from the perspective of the neighbor, and we replay throughout this entire scene, so it plays over again for the respective of his neighbor to see what he does. I thought that that was kind of fun. So ultimately, the ultimately this neighbor really hates like seemingly everybody, but I think he really hates Halloween, and there's a reason for that. We have this neighbor that doesn't decorate his entire house, doesn't deliver candy for anybody. And so, reasonably, what ends up happening is there is consistently this scarecrow ash looking kid that keeps popping up through every portion of this movie. Basically, the kid that you would normally see on the poster of this movie, like you see him throughout this entire thing. He's everywhere, and now we get to find out what is up with this kid. Um, because ultimately, we're gonna come back around now to what happened in the very beginning of this movie to help you understand the end. So we have this neighbor that hates Halloween, and ultimately, we find out that he goes outside his home, and like there's nothing in front of his house that is decorated at all and with any Halloween because he hates Halloween. Eventually he pops back out of his home to realize every single jack-o'-lantern from the entire neighborhood is all displayed on in front of his home. And so people are starting to think um, that he is welcoming people in to go trick-or-treating. And so reasonably what happens within this movie is this little scarecrow guy tries to trick or treat at his home, but he's not delivering any kind of candy to anybody. So this neighbor goes back into his home, and he's just like yeah, this sucks and blah blah blah. And I'm like he's like the Scrooge of Halloween, but we'll find out why. So immediately, this scarecrow kid is not just gonna like just go, oh well, like this guy just like he doesn't want to play today. Well, well, I'm gonna come into his house and I'm just gonna play with him. So ultimately, we have this scarecrow kid that comes into this neighbor's house and scares the bejesus out of him. And he's just like, what are you doing in my house? And so we go on to having this guy like considering this kid just sneaked into his home, we are having him like shooting shotgun shells at this kid. We are like, this guy is like consistently being attacked by this kid because ultimately we find out that he unsheaths this one candy bar to reveal a knife, and he's like, oh my god. So, and then eventually we find out this kid also has a lollipop that also, like a pumpkin lollipop that can double as a knife as well. So this kid is just deadly. So eventually, this kid is going all ham on this neighbor, stabbing him, trying to kill him. The neighbor has to take a shotgun to this Scarecrow-esque character, and eventually we see this character being unmasked to eventually see that this Scarecrow-esque like character has a pumpkin for a head, and like he looks very jack-o'-lantern-esque, and I'm just like, wow, this is a really cool visual. And so what ends up happening is this neighbor is trying as much as possible to crazily uh, take out this kid, like take out this scarecrow, this pumpkin killer. And so recently he's like trying to like use any weapon to his disposal, and it gets to the point to where this kid loses a hand. And so what happens is ultimately the once we get the shotgun shot, we're assuming that this guy had won. But really what ends up happening is that this arm goes, or this hand tries to go and attack said neighbor, and he's like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, if I dice and slice and chop this thing up in little pieces, it's just going to keep coming after me. And this is crazy. So what ends up happening is the hand ends up going back to the rest of the body. And then so this scarecrow-esque like thing with this pumpkin head is again still coming for this neighbor and slowly but surely crawling up to him, and he is like getting ready to knife this guy. And so what happens is the neighbor ends up having a candy bar on him. And so what ends up happening is the kid accidentally stabs the candy bar and then like looks at the candy bar and grabs the candy bar and starts eating the candy bar, and then he leaves. He leaves. And I'm like, what? What is going on here? But then I figure it out. I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Here's the story. So the reason why this neighbor hates Halloween is because he was the bus driver that killed all those kids in that bus crash. Because he was burning up the photos in his fireplace because to reflect on a thing that had been like traumatizing him for years. And so because this scarecrow-esque like character ends up leaving because he gets candy, the neighbor forcibly for the rest of the night delivers candy to anyone that comes to his home, and is like basically whatever he has left sparingly like old man Ash like candy. He's just delving it out to any of the kids that come to his home because he wants to participate in Halloween, because if he doesn't, then this pumpkin head will come back after him and kill him. So he now is willing to participate in trick or treating and participate in Halloween, and he likes Halloween now because he is alive. What an interesting story. And so, reasonably, what ends up happening is that the bus driver or the neighbor ends up opening his door once again to see the entire zombified uh, bus kids all coming back from the dead to go and kill him. And what also we see is the scarecrow Ash like kid who is looking over at the knight in shining armor and the robot coming home from their parade, and the robotic girl is just like, God, like, I hate Halloween and I hate these decorations. I just want to quickly as possible take them down. And then immediately the scarecrow is looking at her and he's like, you're my next. You're next. Because if you don't want to participate in Halloween, you're going to die. And so I get it. This scarecrow-ish like character, scarecrowish pumpkinhead, whatever you want to call him, he kills people that doesn't participate in the holiday. That is interesting. I like that. Um, like I like that it doesn't, like, it's not a random thing that is just put into here to where this kid is just killing people for no reason. There is a reason that if you don't participate in Halloween, this thing seeks you out and takes you down until you participate, and then because it's like the spirit of Halloween. So I get that is really cool, and I enjoyed that for that being that interesting. It will be interesting to see ultimately how, if they did a sequel of this movie during current times, like, not everybody can participate in Halloween because it's just the way it is. So what is the spirit of Halloween going to come after people just because they don't want to they want to social distance and they want to try to this and that and try to be safe? Anyways, that is this movie, and I spent probably way too much time reviewing it, but it was such a fun film. I really enjoyed it. At the end of the day, hopefully you go out of your way to say that you enjoyed it as well, or at some point are going to rewatch it if you've already seen it or this and that. But man, what a fun film compared to a lot of other just kind of variety-ish like movies that usually are a lot of crap. Like I think even the holiday Seth Green movie, like there's some good points in that movie, but there's probably a lot of crap in that at some points. Um, but with this one, like it's a very good, like it's a really good story that kind of comes back around plenty enough times. Like it's kind of like the show Black Summer, where ultimately you can consistently see a lot of coming back around in that show. The zombie show, which I really liked. So at the end of the day, I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.